Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Amani Aljak, and on behalf of myself and the Consortium on Gender, Security, and Human Rights, I would like to welcome you to our first speaker series for this fall. Today's event by Dr. Manuela Picq is run as a hybrid event with live audiences here at UMass, as well as participants from around the world via Zoom. So for those of us who are joining us, depending on where they are, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I would like to say a few stuff about our event today. The event is sponsored by the Department of Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies, Mellon Grant, affirming multivocal humanities. It's really my pleasure to thank the director of the Consortium on Gender Security and Human Rights, Dr. Carol Cohn, and the administrative assistant, Claire Kendrick, and the interns who are joining us here. Without them, this event wouldn't be possible. I would also like to thank our co-sponsors, and we have many of them. It takes a village, actually, to make these kind of events. The Office of the Provost and Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs, the McCormick Grad School of Policy and Global Studies, the Honors College, the Office of Global Programs, Student Multicultural Affairs, and the Departments of Sociology, Political Sciences, Anthropology, Native American and Indigenous Studies, and the Conflict Resolution and Human Security, Human Security, and Global Governance departments. So before I introduce Dr. Manuela Picq, I would like to say something about the location where we are here today. As many of you might know, this land belongs to indigenous people, particularly the Pawtucket and Nipmuc indigenous communities. And many of these kind of indigenous groups who used to live around here have been forced out of their territory through genocidal and traumatic processes and very violent history that continues up to now. So when we talk and honor kind of the land of these indigenous groups, it's really important to emphasize that land acknowledgement by itself is not enough, but we need to follow by action building, solidarity, and on ensuring that we support the land back movement as well. The structure of the event now, we are having, as I said, a live audience who are kind of joining us via Zoom. And for those audiences, the chat is open right now and will be open towards the end of the event. But the Q&A will be open throughout. So if you have any questions for our Zoom kind of friends, please make sure that you post them now. Also, at the end of the event, a survey will pop up for those who are on Zoom. Please make sure you take the time to fill these surveys. Similarly, for those who are here in the room, you notice that on your chairs, they are also like a survey that you would like for you to fill out. So for everybody, we also wanted to let you know that this event is taped and will be available, is recorded. So for those of you who have consent issues, this is just to confirm that it is going to be recorded and will be available on the consortium online kind of pages and also on YouTube. So now it's really my great kind of pleasure and privilege to introduce Dr. Manuela Picq, who's a senior lecturer in the Department of Political Science, as well as the Department of Sexuality, Women's and Gender Studies, our sister kind of department at Amherst College, UMass. So she is a prolific scholar, just published a book in 2024 by the University of Arizona Press, Savages and Citizens. And prior to that, she published a book that I used quite a bit in my classes, Indigenous Women Challenging World Politics. It's really an amazing one that was published in 2018. She has co-authored 4 edited volumes, published dozens of scholarly articles, and contributes to political analysis to various international media outlets in English, Spanish, French, and Portuguese. Really impressive. Her work is her work at the intersection of scholarship, journalism, and activism. And that work led her to experience political violence and for her to be fired, detained, and expelled from Ecuador in 2018. However, during the same year and recognition of Dr. Pick's work, she was nominated a new generation of public intellectuals in 2018. She was also featured in the very renowned FemiList 100 of women working in law, policy, peace building across the global South. It's my honor to introduce you.
Buenas tardes. Manaja Mashikuna, Runakuna. It's really an honor to be here. Carol, muchas gracias. You know, when your heroes like invite you and actually read your work, you're like, it actually happens. So I'm extremely honored to be here today because of the people who are behind this project, because this project of the Gender Consortium is powerful beyond the US, I would say. It's a space we go to as feminist scholars of international relations, but other fields, to try to build knowledge, share knowledge, spread the word, and break borders. And today, I am supposed to talk about Ecuador, and I will talk about Ecuador. But the problem is that the rivers in Ecuador, the rivers we're defending, have dried up. The rivers of Cuenca have dried up. The city of Quito, where I live part-time, is on fire. And most of Latin America is on fire. So I figured that to be able to arrive in Ecuador and the defense of territory we do in Ecuador, I'm going to have to take you to the Amazon first to show you a little bit of what's happening. Does anybody know that the Amazon is on fire? Yeah. It has finally made the news. So I could say the Amazon is on fire, but when we say it's not as strong as what we see. So I decided to show you a little bit of what's happening. The Amazon is the largest water reserve we have of fresh water that we have in the world. And right now, the entire Amazon is drying up and on fire to unprecedented levels, probably 150,000 years, if not more. That's. I wanted to show you pictures just to give you a sense, because we are living a moment of apocalypse. And I think we are not really grasping what's happening. When the impossible happens, we don't necessarily recognize it at first sight. So these are images of the Amazon River itself, right? The largest waterway in the Amazon, and you can see how it's drying up. A lot of the floating homes are just sitting on the riverbed right now. These are all pictures from last week taken in different spaces. This is the Madeira River, also in Brazil. People carrying gallons of water on their backs. People crossing the river bed walking. You can see on the map more or less where it is located. It's really the heart of Amazonia. All of Amazonia is drying up, right? And so here we have multiple rivers that are the largest rivers in the Brazilian Amazon. About 65% of the Amazon is in Brazil. This is happening across all of the Amazons. Rio Solimões, Rio Negro, Rio Amazonas, Rio Madeira, they're all drying up to unprecedented levels. So of course we can talk about human rights, the communities who live there who do not fish anymore, who do not have transportation anymore, all of the ecocide around the drying of the river. But what's interesting is to understand how systematic it is and what's at play. These are images from the Xingu. The Xingu is the river valley where the Belo Monte Dam was built. It was a mega dam that was designed. This dam was designed in the 70s by the military government in Brazil. It did not materialize back then. It was built much later by President Dilma Rousseff, who had been tortured by the Brazilian military. And it's interesting to think how the Belo Monte Dam destroyed the whole Xingu River Valley, reserve, indigenous territories, biodiverse region of the Amazon, because we can see the connection and the continuity between the military dictatorship of the 70s and a leftist government led by a woman on the left, right, who had been tortured herself by the military. As opposed and different, as extremely different they could be, these two governments relied on extractivism in the Amazon to develop the state, right? So these are territories, indigenous territories burning. Last week in the Xingu, you can see indigenous firefighters trying to stop the fires. And you can see on the little map, like or the aerial view, right? The Xingu River in the middle. And the extractivism moving towards the river and trying to eat up everything until the river. And so these are images from fires last week on the Xingu River. The fires reached the river. Literally the firewall. This is not the apocalyptic. The result is massive drought and deforestation. One of the things that might be important for us is to understand why are these fires happening. And those are some of the images of devastation. There is a confluence of agribusiness that has been, mostly for cattle and soy, eating up onto the forests. In 50 years, we have destroyed about 40% of Amazonia in Brazil, and it's mostly agribusiness. Mining, other forms of extractive industries, but it's mostly agribusiness. Soy to feed the animals in the global north, right? And meat. Brazil is the #1 exporter, global exporter of red meat. So all of that requires land, so they're eating up on the forest, on indigenous territories to create pasture. In June, President Lula in Brazil announced the protection of certain territories, reservations, natural areas. The agribusiness sector in that area, which is close to the Xingu, announced that it would react through fire, right? And back then we didn't really measure, but what is happening is that in addition to what the agribusiness sector has been doing over the last decades, now we have criminal fires, right? It's the dry moment in Amazonia, which is drier and drier every year. And they're like perfect timing. So they're creating fires. Those are criminal fires, right? That are being led precisely to finish up with the forest and to create pasture. It's the best way of land grab, right? If you burn down the forest, there are no more environmental norms to respect. There are no more indigenous people living there or local communities. So you do not have any more rights to prior consultation or consent to respect. So it's a great way to bypass the state, bypass the laws and the human rights or environmental rights that may apply to the region. Brazilian Minister of the Environment, Marina Silva, who's an Amazonian indigenous woman, has been talking since last week of climate terrorism. Who are the climate terrorists? And how present are they in the states? The agribusiness sector in Brazil occupies 30% of Congress, if not more, and they're present across political parties. It's not like they're on the right or on the left or in the center, they're across. They have alliances with evangelical sectors, with business sectors, and they're present in all parts of government. So what I want you to see through this image here, these are maps showing the extent of the fires. These are maps from NASA. It's not happening in the Xingu or on the Madeira. It's happening everywhere. Latin America is on fire. The Amazon is on fire and Latin America is on fire. So of course there is the local destruction of forests, lifeways, peoples, animals, plants. And it's really important to think that the Amazon not only is the biggest watershed that we have in the world, and it's a double one, right? There's the water in the rivers in the Amazon, the land rivers that we know of, but there are also the sky rivers. And there's actually more water in the sky rivers, in the rivers floating. So when the Amazon, when it's hot during the day, the Amazon forest is perspiring and creating humidity. And that humidity represents more water than the water that's flowing to the Atlantic every day. It's about 5 billion gallons of water per day that goes into the sky. So not only we do not have the forest that is drying up the land rivers, but the sky rivers are, of course, drying up too, because there is no more forest to produce them. And instead of them, we have the smoke, which you can see in the other map, right? So São Paulo is covered in smoke, Brasilia is covered in smoke. And currently in Brazil, so all of Amazonia, all of the municipalities of Amazonia have declared a state of environmental emergency, climate emergency. And the climate terrorists continue to put fires in various areas of the Amazon. And there are about 200 cities in Brazil that have humidity levels lower than the Sahara. This means we have a Saharization, desertification of Amazonia happening today. And the water of Brazil, Latin America, and I would dare say the continent, comes from the Amazon. When the rivers dry in Amazonia, where do they go? That water that is not there anymore, it's gone somewhere else. And we know, for instance, that in West Africa, there are floods happening right now, in Poland, in various places, right? Why does it matter for the Andes? And why are our rivers dry in the Andes? Because those sky rivers, when they touch the Andean Cordillera, what do you call, like mountain range, they touch the mountains and it rains. But now there's no more sky rivers. They're not going south in Latin America. They're not going to the Andes. Right? The rivers in the Andes are drying up. We haven't had rain for over 2 months in my region of Ecuador. And the experts, the meteorologists say it's going to rain maybe in February. Plantations like our fields are drying up. There is no more water. And 2 days ago, the government in Ecuador announced it's the first Amazonian country to announce blackouts because the mega dams that create electricity do not have water anymore. Right? So the cycle of water has been disrupted, right? And our lifeways are not operating anymore. And I do believe it's nothing short of an apocalypse that we're going through. What is the key logic behind all of that? Rape, dispossession, fires, right? How do we turn life into property? Through fires and rape. Those who burn the forest are the same who rape the women. Right? This is what Eliane Brum, a Brazilian journalist who created the online newspaper Suma Uma, which has been moved to the Amazon. So they consider the Amazon the center of the world because the Amazon is seeing our future, our collective future. The Amazon is not, the fires in the Amazon are not an Amazonian problem, and the Amazon is not an exception. It's what the planet and our civilizatory model is going towards. It's already happening. It's just happening there to them, but them and there is us here now. So I just want to keep that in mind. Like the Amazon is often considered as a very abundant green space. It's ever more a place of destruction, a place of constant rape, a place of constant fire and contamination. Right? If the river hasn't dried up, it's contaminated. If the forest, if you have not been displaced from the forest is on fire, etc., etc. Right? So there is this parallel processes of dispossession of life happening from the Amazon to the world. It is, Latin America is the region with most femicides in the world. It is also the region in the world with most nature defenders killed. And they're not killed anywhere, they're killed mostly in Amazonia. So I'll give you some numbers. Indigenous peoples are 5% of the world population, but they represent almost 50% of the nature defenders killed, which means who's putting their bodies out there to protect nature, to protect life, to stop the destruction. We do not participate, all of us, equally. And yet it's not always recognizable because in New York, there are the, climate protests. I forgot how they're like 350, 360 or something, right? But there's all of this mobilization for the climate against global warming. And the narrative is one of the environment. The narrative of Indigenous people is not one of the environment because they are the environment, right? As David Kopenawa says, Yanomami shaman, in the forest, the ecology are us. We are the ecology. We are nature. Right? So Indigenous people are saying we have to protect nature, this thing out there. Indigenous people are saying we need rights to self-determination. Right? It's a political process. It's not an environmental issue. And this is where we can think about the body and the territory as connected dots, right? Because the rape of women and the burning of the forest are both processes of turning life into property, right? Latin America is the region where there is most extractivism and therefore most nature defenders killed. So 88% of nature defenders killed in the world are Latin Americans. So if you think about nature defenders, think Indigenous peoples from Latin America, basically. And a lot of them are women because women work non-remunerated jobs, because women their bodies are treated as nature, up for grabs, right? Because women who live in these territories feel the contamination on a daily basis through water, through the forest disappearing, right? It's crazy to see, but often you go to isolated places in Amazonia and you see women with children who do not have a finger, who do not have an ear, and you ask them what happened, and they say, I don't know, they're just born like that. The level of contamination in their bodies, right? They breastfeed, they're breastfeeding contamination, they're breastfeeding death to their children because those territories have been intervened by contamination, by toxic waste on a regular basis for decades. The Amazon of Peru, for instance, over 80% of it has already been under oil concession. So what kind of wilderness are we talking about? Amazonia, I don't know if it's something that's very known here. Amazonia is not a natural wild place in the sense that it has been man-managed for decades. Even the UN recognizes that the biodiversity of Amazonia is actually created by humans, right? It's fomented, nurtured by humans. Human occupation of Amazonia, which is at least 12,000 years old, scientific evidence, right? Has been contributing to the biodiversity, meaning humans made biodiversity because humans are part of nature, like other species, right? So just like mycelium is creating biodiversity, humans are also creating biodiversity. outside of this civilizatory model of today. And so we have been for thousands of years creating biodiversity, and in 50 years, we were able to destroy all of that biodiversity, not all of it yet, but a lot of it, right? So what is happening, and to which extent what is happening today is an environmental problem or a political problem, right? And I think the core of the civilizatory crisis that we inhabit today is one of self-determination. Self-determination over our bodies, and it's not a coincidence that abortion is such an issue, and self-determination over our territories, right? What do Indigenous people and women have in common? They do not decide over their territories and their bodies, right? Appropriation. So let's move to more optimistic things. We were, of course, trying to defend the waters from mining in our territories, and now we're like, we don't have water coming from the sky because the cycle of water has been broken. But let me tell you some stories of resistance as we think in the background of who owns and who is owned. I think that's the core question of this civilizatory crisis that we inhabit. This is a picture of Quimsacocha in the highlands of southern Ecuador. It's about 4,000 meters high, so maybe 12,000 feet, something like that. And below the water, there's gold. So about 30 years ago, the government of Ecuador sold into concession those territories to mining corporations. And for 30 years, local communities have been resisting, organizing in various forms. So first is like, what is happening? What is the mining all about? It started with street protests, blocking roads, road blockades, right? It's a traditional strategy from Andean peoples. Then it moved into courts, electoral politics. And over time, there has been an education of the communities, right? So the peasants became indigenous, became water defenders, right? And now are very well literated legally, electorally on how to defend water. So I wanted to tell you about Quimsacocha. Anybody in the room has ever heard about Quimsacocha? Raise your hand. No. Oh, two. It's very little known even in Ecuador. And I think that's what's interesting, because there are other issues better known or other territories or political struggle, like the Yasuni. Yasuni is a biodiverse hotspot in the Ecuadorian Amazon. There's the Yasuni, there's more knowledge about it, right? Quimsacocha is a small mountain in the south of the country, no NGOs there, no international funds to do activism. And yet, the impact it had on the country is impressive. And I wanted to tell the stories of Quimsacocha to show how local people organizing just for their own local survival can actually have an impact in the province, nationally, and perhaps globally. So even if things look impossible or preposterous, you say, sometimes we have to move forward because you never know what can happen out there. So in 2011, in the 90s, they start mobilizing against the mine. And in 2011, the community organizes in Giron the first prior consultation. So they're like, we're going to vote to see who's for mining. But the government didn't want to do an election, a referendum. So the community organized its own referendum. They're like, we're going to do it. They invited international observers, NGOs, talked about it for weeks, months, organized everything, and there was an election. 93% of the communities voted against mining in 2011. Seeing the results, the government comes and says, oh, but that's not valid because you organized it and it doesn't count because you're not the state. And only elections led by the state count. Who knows how you organized your election, right? So the community says, okay, then we're going to do an election organized by you, but the state didn't want to do an election because if not, it was going to lose. So the process starts to raise signatures among the population, right? You need a certain percentage of voters in the area demanding a referendum. You present those signatures to the Constitutional Court and the Electoral Council. They check the signatures, they check the demand, and they authorized or not to do a referendum. For years, they raised signatures. went through all the processes with the Electoral Council and the Constitutional Court, and were authorized to do the first environmental referendum in Ecuador. It's called a popular consultation. It's not necessarily about the environment, but it's turning out that every popular consultation in Ecuador is happening about nature and specifically about water and extractive industries. And so I put some pictures in there of some of the people behind the scenes, the process. In 2011, they did the community consultation. In 2018, the Supreme Court authorized it. And in 2019, Ecuador had its first formal popular consultation on nature and mining. It was in the city of Girón, which is a small town in the province of Azuay in the southern Andes of Ecuador. 90% of the voters voted for water and against mining. That whole process of this tiny community without NGOs, without money, without, it's mostly rural, so it's not there are like big universities or anything, inspired others to also ask in their territories for environmental referendums, right? Popular consultations. So Pacto asked for one in 2014. The Yasuni, various social movements asked for one. Summarizing, in 2019, there was the first one in Girón. 2021, there was one in the city of Cuenca. It's the third largest city in Ecuador. Again, 90% voted in defense of water, against mining. 2023, 2 electoral popular consultations, referendum on nature are allowed. One on mining in the capital, in Quito. It's called, the campaign was called Quito sin minería, Quito without mining. It was for to block mining in the Chocó. And the other one was national, and it was the first time in the world, and that was, you may have seen it last year, 65% of Ecuadorians voted to leave oil underground in the Amazon, in the Yasuni region, this biodiversity hotspot with people living in voluntary isolation. And that was the first time that in Ecuador and in Latin America, and I believe in the world, that you have an entire nation voting on an environmental consultation to leave oil underground. And it really marks a transition where voters are telling governments, we do not want extraction. We do want life, we want clean water, right? Instead of more GDP. Ecuador is a country that depends over 90% of its exports on oil, just so we have that. And still, people voted to leave oil underground. So it's interesting because even in Ecuador, people don't know that the first consultation was in Girón, right? In Quimsacocha. It's like people are like, oh, if they're doing it, maybe we can do it too. But then you start having these like ideas inspiring each other to mobilize. We mobilized in the streets, like blocking roads. We mobilized in courts. So of course, in parallel to the electoral process asking to vote, my partner Yaku, who's from the community, who's a lawyer, has been demanding the right to prior consultation to indigenous communities, right? And we won in 2022, after decades too. So in 2022, the local courts, the provincial courts say there was no prior consultation. The government sold these territories to foreign mining corporations without asking the local communities and the indigenous peoples. And according to international law, indigenous peoples have the right to decide over their territories. We were in court. I was in the courtroom as an academic expert to give an amicus curiae. The lawyer of the, so just so you realize who's against us, right? The corporation Dundee Precious Metal Canadian, or based in Canada, the Ministry of the Environment, the Office of the President, the Ministry of Energy and Mines are all together, right, defending that they will mine in Quimsacocha below the water. And when we claim all of the indigenous rights to prior consultation, international law, I mean, you cannot get lost. The lawyer of the Ministry of the Environment says, it's not because they speak Quechua that they're dressed indigenous in Quechua and that they have Quechua last names that they're Quechua. And I was like, wait, this is definitional violence, right? And so I tweeted about it. I'm like, this is definitional violence, and you're trying to erase their indigeneity, to erase their rights to prior consultation, to bypass international law and national law. And then I tweeted it, and I got a tweet from somebody who worked with the census and who told me, this is happening in the census right now. They're erasing people's ethnicities and indigeneity. And then we started realizing there is a bigger plan here at play. Why are they trying to erase indigenous people from the census? Because then if you don't have indigenous people here, there are no rights to prior consultation, no rights to nothing, right? So the strategy of the government to define who you are, erase you to steal your land. I'm not going to talk about the census, but we discovered in the census that they were changing the categories for indigenous and Afro-Ecuadorians. The census results came out last year, actually this year, earlier in the spring. 30% of Afro-Ecuadorians disappeared from the census. Gone. The same thing happened 2 years ago in Colombia. 30% of Afro-Colombians disappeared from the map. Why are they disappearing the Afros? Right? Indigenous peoples are on the same level and they should be growing, right? So there are a lot of strategies used. This census was financed by the World Bank. What is the World Bank doing? Financing censuses that are disappearing Afro-Indigenous peoples in Latin America. So it's not a problem that is ours. It's a collective problem, right? And it requires not individual activism from these communities who are already carrying so much on their backs. It requires collective responsibility. So I'll leave that as a general conversation. I'll show you, this is from 22 when we won in court. So the judge said, okay, if you say they're not indigenous, since you say they're not indigenous, we're going to order a double consultation. You're going to do the indigenous consultation and the environmental consultation for those who are not indigenous. So the beauty is that the communities are now supported by urban sectors that have become environmentalists. In a way, indigenous rural communities taught urban peoples in Ecuador, especially the youth, to become environmental nature defenders. And the courts are allying too. There are over 20, 30 cases of rights of nature, rights to self-determination being upheld in courts of Ecuador, despite all the violence we inhabit. So there is increasingly also local governments taking action, but the central government refuses to implement its own laws. This is when we came out of court, and just a little overview, it's in Spanish, but I told you the story, just a little video we made so you can see the faces and the bodies doing the lucha.
Una lucha histórica que valió la pena. Hoy, 12 de julio del 2022, el juez Carlos Cárdenas acaba de sentenciar disponiendo la suspensión de actividades mineras de Quimsacocha por falta de consulta previa. 3 décadas de resistencia. En estas 3 décadas fuimos criminalizados, 4 veces encarcelado, junto a 150 criminalizados por la protesta social, golpeados, arrastrados, vilipendiados, criminalizados. Entre tristezas y alegrías, entre escepticismos y esperanzas, entre sueños y utopías, construimos la resistencia. Ahora queremos agradecerles a nuestras abuelitas, a nuestros abuelitos, a la Pachamamita por tanta energía que nos dio, y dejamos una gotita para que nuestros jóvenes, que son la inspiración, y las generaciones venideras, que no decaigan esta lucha. La resistencia continúa, y con mucha vibra, hasta el último del latido del corazón y el primer latido de nuestros hijos. ¡Que viva Quimsacocha!
Siempre lucharé defendiendo el agua y ahí estaremos.
So the latest step, since we won everything through 30 years, and many of the nature defenders and water protectors are not here anymore to see the victories, it really is an intergenerational struggle. And I often think of the Maori people of Wantaganui who have been defending the river for 160 years until the government of New Zealand recognized the river as a subject of legal rights. It will be an intergenerational struggle. And one of the things the community did was to create a community radio, right? So Radio Kimsakocha, the radio of water. And it started, we competed for a public frequency, like given by the government. The government has, what do you call, quotas for community radios. Even though we were very high ranked, last minute we lost the community radio to Maria Radio, which is a radio owned by the Vatican. No comment there. But since the community didn't get the frequency, we're like, let's just do activist radio and just create our own radio and spread it as we can, use the airwaves, even if the government doesn't authorize us. And so in 2018, the radio started operating. And it's a key tool of community education, mobilization. We do a lot of mingas. I don't know if there are people from the Andes in the room, but minga is when everybody comes together and work for a common purpose. So we go clean the river, reforest, do activity with the community water system. We have our own community water system, which is water from Kimsakocha highlands flowing into the communities. So we control the whole system of water. We pay $3 a month for water, and we maintain the water system, waterways together, and protect the mountain together so the mining doesn't come in. So the radio is really a tool of education, of transmission to new generations, and mobilization and understanding who is doing what, how we can mobilize together, and build the future. Imagine the future, build it together, and take care of our territories and our bodies too. There's a lot of music. Most of the people working in the radio in a voluntary fashion are the youth, right? So they kind of shape what we talk about, what music we listen to, and a lot of the information from the communities is transmitted to there. So of course, when the Dundee Precious Metal Corporation lost again in 22 and in 23, the first thing they did was to go after the radio, because like if we're going to have to do a prior consultation, then we have to spread misinformation and block any form of community organizing and worst education. So in February this year, we got news that the radio was being shut down, that they wanted to jail the president of the radio, right, for doing an illicit radio. So now we've been mobilizing and we're going to court. We lost in court 2 weeks ago. We're appealing, and we're probably going to go to court for a while in Ecuador and going to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights to claim the community radio and the indigenous radio as an indigenous right to communication, to media, and to self-education, right, or like our own education system. So in closing, what I wanted to raise as a question with these examples is, we have a lot of mobilization. A lot of the defenders are women, as you have seen, who are working on their territories, and who have achieved a lot. The case of Kimsakocha is so interesting because not only it was able to win in the streets, in courts, create collective education, win electoral wins, but it also, and create the radio, but it also inspired other territories in Ecuador to do the same. And when Yasuni won the vote last year, it was in newspapers across the world, and I'm sure it inspired other societies, other communities elsewhere to also defend the rights of nature and vote to leave oil or metal or gold underground. The question is, it's not working. And that's why I think it's interesting to think about Kimsakocha and Ecuador at large as more than a case study, a site to think world politics. Because we think, if it passes in the law, if you elect a president, like, if it's the new, if you pass a referendum, it's going to happen, right? No. So the contradiction is we have this emerging legal framework of the rights of nature, which is a contribution of indigenous peoples, right? What does it mean to be human? Where is nature? Are we nature here? Or is nature just the single tree? Solita, pobrecita aquí. Like, who is nature, Are we not part of nature, right? So when we're talking about defending nature, let's think about self-determination, bodies and territories, right? But we have the rights of nature. We have over 23 countries in the world who have passed laws defending the rights of nature. We have abundance of case sentences. And yet, governments, not only in Ecuador, continue to sell the land for extraction, continue to refuse to stop the climate terrorists, continue to sell bodies and land and rivers to create profit, GDP, even though we're all dying in this collective suicide, right? So what do we do? And the United Nations, right, saying that it's the fastest judicial revolution, right? The rights of nature. The 20th century was the century of human rights. Now this century is going to be the century of the rights of nature. But it's talk. It's legislation that is not getting implemented. We have states that do not follow their own constitutions. And it's not just Ecuador, although Ecuador is an interesting place to think about this theoretically. We have states that are ordering us to play by their rules, by their constitutions, by their elections, and we do through decades of mobilization, centuries of slavery dispossession. And when we win in their terms, on their games, in their courts, in their elections, they still do not implement and abide. So the government of Ecuador, Lasso, who was a banker, the former president, when in the elections, what won was nature, he said, I'm not going to abide to the referendum. The new president, Noboa, who's a banana producer, the heir of the largest banana empire in Ecuador, said, oh yeah, we'll protect the Yasuni during the campaign. Once he won, he's like, we'll take care of the Yasuni maybe in 2 years, not now. So there is like the defense of nature, even though you win in the courts, it's postponed by the central government time and again, right? So what we have now are the fires that you saw. What we have now are the sky rivers that are gone, and there is no more water in Ecuador, and there are blackouts across the country. There's nowhere to go. There is nowhere to go, and we're in this all together. It's not a problem in Amazonia. I was just reading some news on social media before starting here. The Brazilian Amazon is plagued by fires. It's not the Brazilian Amazon, it's the world, it's Latin America. And I'm going to go back to this picture or these maps by NASA. I'm not making it up. It's not a Latin American problem. We are setting ourselves on fire and flooding other parts of ourselves. So I want to close by asking, what do we do in terms of activism or maybe collective responsibility? In 2015, I was detained with my partner. We were beaten in a protest. I was detained and expelled from Ecuador. And it's often called activism, but sometimes I wonder, like, is scholar activism an option? Or are we complicit as scholars when we do not put our bodies together by our ideas? If we do not embody our ideas, how good are our ideas? And how colonial and extractive are they, right? So I think we really have to think in the global north and as scholars, how are we contributing to the ecocide and the genocide, or how are we participating in solutions? And there is no easy way out, because we have entered the unknown, the apocalypse of these fires on the Xingu River. Whatever we knew before is useless now, right? We have to redefine our relations in very deep ways and imagine solutions that were never necessary. The Amazon has not seen that in 150,000 years. We're not going to solve it with the civilizatory paradigms that we carry within ourselves here today. And like Belo Monte on the Xingu, that is one of the mega dams that has dried up the Amazon of Brazil, all of the destruction is happening with the complicity of our governments. So it requires us to think governance and self-determination, which is another word for sovereignty, beyond the states. And we can only do this together and reinvent politics in other realms. Doesn't mean we shouldn't invade politics and occupy politics, formal politics, but we also need to think politics and inhabit politics at other levels. I hope the experiences from Ecuador will be inspiring in some way and that we can join forces across borders. Maybe we're going to take some questions or comments, emotions, songs. Yes, go ahead. Can you speak louder? Sorry.
On the photos of the Kimsakosha citizens, is there a reason why they have the flowers on like the right photo? Is there a meaning behind
A
that?
reason for what, sorry?
There's they are holding flowers. Is there on the right photo?
This one?
Yes.
Yeah, we were giving flowers to the water. So in indigenous cosmologies, water is alive. Water is not only life, but it's one of the members of the community. So we did a ceremony, a celebration of the lagoons. Kimsa Kocha means 3 lagoons. 3 is Kimsa in Quechua, Kocha is lagoon. So this is the main lagoon, and we went there with flowers to celebrate, and we did a big picnic at Pampa Mesa to celebrate and just spend time with the Abuela Agua. Yes, on the back. The mic is coming for those who are on Zoom, sorry. Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question. Unfortunately, I do not believe any government will ever pressure. Every state feeds off extraction, right? So the history of the modern states in Latin America and probably in the continent, it's dispossession. It's getting the gold, getting the land, selling. The history of the state in Latin America is the history of Potosi. Potosi is the oldest silver mine. It's from the 1540s. It has been operating non-stop. Over 10 million people are estimated to have died in those mines. Who in the room knew Potosi? Raise your hand. Very few. Una Boliviana? Una Boliviana. We all know the Holocaust. We do not know Potosi. What histories are told? Why is it so normalized that nature is up for grabs, that it can be appropriated, just like it's so normalized that women are property too, even though we contest it, but the level of femicides indicates the opposite, right? So what forms of life are we protecting from property, and what does regimes of property create, not in just dispossession of wealth, dispossession of life, and how does that affect all of us? So if the state as an entity feeds of extraction, no state and no international community will ever pressure other states, right, into stopping extraction. And I see the dilemma going even further in the global north, global south. The global north feeds the lives we have here are absolutely unsustainable. We are unsustainable as a civilization, but the lives in the global north are unsustainable, and they are only made possible through the extraction in the global south, across the global south. So of course, it's not the state of the global north that are going to say, stop taking oil from the Amazon, or mining cobalt, right? Or mining gold and silver or whatever else. the EVs, the lithium is coming from Bolivia, from Argentina. That extraction there, which is just a displacement from one industry, an oil industry, to a lithium industry, is celebrated here as green. There's nothing green about it, right? We're just dislocating the problem somewhere else, but it's always there in the global south. Yes.
My name is Christine, and I want to thank you for this awesome presentation. My question is, during the fight for water, there have been a lot of human rights violations. My question is, were there any arguments related to the protection of vulnerable groups or minorities in the Rico Blanco case? And all where there's consideration integrated into the final judgment?
Can you repeat the second part of your question? So the human rights violation against water defenders, correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And were there any arguments related to the protection of the minorities? And if yes, or were there consideration integrated into the final judgment?
So usually that I know of, there has been no judgments of a water defender. There's a beautiful case, my partner, Yaku, when he was detained in 2013, he was accused of altruistic terrorism. So it was terrorism because they blocked the road and he was impeding the military and the corporation to pass with the community, and supposedly he was the mental leader, the organizer. But it was considered altruistic because water is a common good, right? So literally the sentence said, you know, this altruistic terrorist crime. And then you like see the, I don't even know how to call it. But usually water defenders are not protected. The sentence was diminished like from many months to a few weeks. There are many other water defenders who were regularly accused of sabotage, terrorism. I haven't seen much about them and the state being punished for all the criminalization against water defenders and protectors. And this is happening in the US, right? Dakota Access Pipeline, a lot of nature defenders, water protectors were criminalized, accused, charged with crimes of terrorism. The Water Defenders Legal Collective is an institution in the US, mostly of indigenous women lawyers who are defending them. What we see in court is that we have rights of nature. Recently is the new rights being upheld, but most importantly, indigenous rights to prior consultation and consent. And that's why they're trying to raise indigenous peoples. When courts sentence in favor of the local communities of water defenders, they use rights to self-determination and to consultation. Therefore, the new strategies of the corporations, maybe through the World Bank, is to erase indigenous peoples, so those rights are not applicable anymore. Yes.
My question is, you said you were expelled and arrested in Ecuador and from Ecuador. I was wondering what the aftermath of that was. Have you been able to go back to Ecuador since then?
Yes, so I was detained in 2015 during a protest against indefinite re-election of the president. You know, like Trump, you vote for me, you don't have to vote ever again. Don't worry, you can just rest what should be. So we had a president like that way before you guys in the US. His name was Rafael Correa. And he said, you know, now this election, it was 2015, the next election coming, everybody will be elected for life. And we're like, ups, no. So there was a lot of mobilization in the country, and water defenders, environmentalists, indigenous peoples were at the forefront. The indigenous movement in Ecuador is extremely strong. They have mobilized in the 90s. Just to give you a story, I'm gonna step back. Indigenous peoples in Ecuador were sold as slaves together with land and cattle until 1963. 1963. slavery of indigenous people was legal in Ecuador. So it's very recent, and there's still a lot of racism, but it's very recent that they have any form of rights de facto. In the 90s, they mobilized nationally, blocked all the roads, and forced the government to negotiate with them. And they have been successfully able to move towards a plurinational state. Ecuador became the first country in the world to not be just a nation state, but a plurinational state, meaning there are many nations within one state. And every indigenous nation has as much power as the white nation, right? That's theoretical. Unfortunately, in practice, it's not very well practiced. But we're moving in that direction, right? And in that constitution of 2008, there was also the rights of nature. So if we fast forward, indigenous peoples have a lot of rights, the political power, and indigenous rights that are guaranteed in the constitution. There are over 20 articles in the constitution of Ecuador that guarantee indigenous collective rights and some indigenous women's rights. There is a political party, an indigenous political party called Pachakutik since 1996. And we had the foreign minister of Ecuador who was an indigenous woman back in 96. So indigenous peoples are present. It's not like here that recently now one arrived, right, Deb Hartland. It's been happening. And in 2015, when indigenous people mobilized, the government is afraid indigenous peoples have been able to top presidents very frequently and represses and detains a lot of the indigenous leaders that they. So I'm detained, and while I'm in jail, before I'm in jail, while I'm in the hospital from the beatings during the night, the government revokes my visa, declares me an illegal immigrant in the morning, and jails me. So I spent a few days in jail, 5 days. There's a lot of mobilization because, you put the white body in jail, it doesn't go well. So there's mobilization among journalists because I was a journalist for Al Jazeera. The country gets into what a scandal. The university professor, who's French-Brazilian, was detained and was beaten by the police. Bad luck for the government. There was a journalist filming right at the moment where they beat me up. So it was all on TV an hour later. And my partner was the president of the Quechua Confederation. So it really became the love story of, the white girl and the indigenous leaders being beaten up by the state. So the state became the villain in a Romeo and Juliet kind of way. And it made a lot of resonance. I had to stay out of Ecuador for 3 years. And when there was the Julian Assange case, or do you remember Julian Assange? He was in the Ecuadorian embassy in London hiding. And they were trying to find a way to get him out of there. So they gave him citizenship. And then the journalists were pissed because they're like, you're doing that to cover up all of the violence you do in Ecuador to maintain this image of the country of the rights of nature, an environmentalist image, while you're putting indigenous people in jail. And Manuela, who has an indigenous family, who has been living in Ecuador for decades, you expelled her and do not let her back in. So they let me back in that context to silence the Julian Assange case. And since 2018, I'm able to live in Ecuador, but I keep a foot at Amherst College because politics are complicated.
We have a couple of questions from our audience on Zoom, and then we'll switch back to in-person questions. But first, we have one from Emilia Alvear. She's asking, what has been the role of schools, teachers, and the local school system? Do you think their role can be strengthened or be different?
I think the responsibility of teachers and education is to teach you not to obey the system and to question it, disobey it, and reinvent it on a daily basis.
Thank you. I also have a question from Claudio Gonzalez. How does Manuela imagine the joining of forces across borders? What are actions you perceive the need for? Thank you.
We have to work together, dream together, love together, eat together, laugh together. I think the only way is to really create relations. We have to be in relations. We tend to see ourselves through national borders, right? As American citizens, as Brazilian citizens, Ecuadorians. And we reiterate these imaginary borders created by the modern states. And we have to start moving beyond them. In our relations. And that goes not only to the national borders, but also human beyond human, right? Who is part of our family? Let's go beyond the heteropatriarchal family model, but also beyond the human, right? What affiliations and responsibilities do we have to our family, to our communities, to the non-human members of our communities, and how do we conceptualize communities? And I don't think there is like a manual. We just have to invent this together. And your generation on the verge of the apocalypse is having to reinvent this on a constant basis. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I have one more Zoom question and then we'll move back to in-person. Denise Humphreys-Bebbington is saying, thank you for a great talk. You mentioned the role of urban publics, especially youth, in joining movements to contest the expansion of extraction and the violation of rights. Can you talk more about the potential for urban support to new forms of economy in Ecuador and beyond?
Yeah, so I think this is really important. As you can see on the image that's up, the bodies of the water defenders are bodies that are either feminized or racialized or treated as nature, not as authority, not as reason, not as power. So it's really important that urban bodies who have more power, who are more part of the elites, who are closer to power, who are able to do a protest in front of ministries, occupy university space, right? Economic spaces of power, to join forces, because then we can do complementary. They can stop the machines from going into the land. We can pressure in front of ministries. We can invade, occupy universities, ministries, right? Get into government, occupy formal politics, impose your agendas. Do not ask permission. There are two questions here that were yes. I'll take the two questions together and answer them.
Hi, I just had a question based on like kind of what we already went over a little bit, but other than what you stated today, what is your biggest, like, what do you remember your biggest obstacle overcoming? And like, what was the biggest reward from that? Like, sorry, I worded that wrong. Like, what was the most rewarding obstacle you overcame in your career fighting all these issues and overcoming these amazing feats?
I think you have to reinvent yourself completely. I mean, the biggest reward is love and trust. Like, all of these are my relations, and but it's the relations you build along the way of trust, that you know people have your back no matter what. When I went to jail, they were all working nonstop to get me out. And once you start doing it, like, you get less afraid, and you know you're functioning. You're almost like tentacles. You're all one body, even though you're multiple bodies. And it gives you a trust in life and in the world and in humans that we tend to not have because of the system we inhabit that fragments everything all the time. And so the love and the trust is the main reward. But of course, maybe Carol knows a little bit, but I've had a very unconventional trajectory. I do not have a tenured position. I'm moving borders. I'm not able, I don't have an office. There are many things that I wasn't able to get in terms of material comforts by doing this, moving between academia and scholarship and activism and power. We ran for office twice, for presidential office in Ecuador. We did other things, right? From the streets to the highest levels of power. We got 20% of the national votes in 2021 in the national election. And we didn't go to the second round. There is a widespread understanding that there was a fraud, but to get our votes of 20%, they had to start talking about water, the other candidates. And so just to be able to shape the national debate and have all of the candidates talking about water and abortion, which were our two banners, changes the story and the way we inhabit the world. Maybe here, last question, here in the front.
I had a question about, is there already community and interaction between water defenders in different countries across Latin America?
Yes, great question. It should be up in my website next week. Actually, I forgot to show you can go into but we organized already 3. They started before me. The last continental meeting of water defenders was in January 2023 in Cuenca. And we had people from the Amazon, from Guatemala, from New York, from Peru, from Bolivia, Brazil, different people from different places who came to exchange as water defenders. It's very hard to meet because it's expensive to travel and everybody's very busy. Water defenders are usually crushed under a lot of pressure and harassment from the state, legal criminalization, lawfare. But we did meet this time, and I think there is one of the benefits of colonization is that most of Latin America speaks Spanish and Portuguese. So we're able to talk to each other across borders in those languages and coordinate. So for instance, our territory in Quimsacocha, we work very closely with the Bufete de Pueblos Indígenas de Guatemala, the Guatemala Legal Office of Indigenous Peoples. And we support their cases, they support our case. We also work with the Legal Collective of Water Defenders here in the US. Natalie Segovia is the coordinator, the president right now. There are different efforts where we try to collaborate. The technicalities of meeting are hard, but the problems and the state strategies are the same everywhere. So often when we set a precedent somewhere, we try to use it across borders.
I have one final question from our Zoom audience, from Poonam Argad. I am a member of and do research with water rights campaigns in Mumbai, India, and pursuing a PhD in the global north. Thank you for sharing these insights from Ecuador. Could you share more about avenues of solidarity across global south contexts and opportunities for comparative approaches to research?
This is a great question. I think that the main challenge is to talk across global south and stop crossing through the global north, right? In the knowledge we produce, in the strategies we use, and we just need to talk more to each other. In that sense, social media has been useful with all the problems it has. So we just have to learn from across global south experiences to try to shed light on each other and walk together. Thank you for all the questions and for your presence. It's really an honor to be here.
So thank you, Dr. Manuela Picq, for such an insightful lecture and for your focus on what you described as climate terrorism and which led to the disappearance of the Amazon forest and devastating and heartbreaking impact on the indigenous communities in South America. I'm really grateful for your ability to move beyond the victimization and also share with us and show us and let us listen to people activism across kind of South America, but also in Ecuador. And the fact that people organizing enables them to pass the first in the world environmental referendum, right? And the kind of different forms of organizing, and I hope that for our students, you would be able to check Dr. Pick's work. And I was also really impressed with the old form of activism in the radio Quimsacocha, and the fact that it is connecting kind of people across borders. Is it heard here in the US? It is on Zoom. And I'm sure that youth have different other forms of activism using traditional media and social media to organize for changes. So on behalf of Carol, the Consortium on Gender Security and Human Rights, thank you so much and welcome me in thanking Dr. Picq. I am also, I would like to thank those who are joining us via Zoom. I understand that. So we have quite an attendance, both via Zoom and here in class. Thank you to all of you here in this room. I hope that as a final reminder that the Zoom folks, as well as you here, will fill the survey. On your seats, as indicated earlier, we have the form that we would like you to fill and either leave at your seats or on the table on your way out. Also, there is a list of equally impressive consortium speaker series for this semester. Please check them out. And if you put your name and email address there, we'll be able to share information about the other kind of speaker series. Everybody, thank you so much. We really appreciate you.